Neri stood before the Magnos High Council, her 9-foot frame small compared to the 15-foot giants who looked down at her. The cold blue lights in the huge stone chamber made her feel even smaller. All 5 council members sat in tall chairs that made them seem like mountains to her. "Citizen Neri," said Elder Da, his deep voice bouncing off the walls. His gray skin wrinkled around his eyes as he frowned at her. "You have been measured and found lacking. Your genetic makeup is unsuitable for our society." Neri looked down at her hands. They were perfect hands, strong and skilled. But on Magnos, they were the hands of a runt, a genetic mistake. At 9 feet tall, she was barely the size of a Magnos child. "I have worked hard," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "My size has not stopped me from being useful." Elder Soul, the only female on the council, shook her head. Her silver hair was pulled tight against her scalp. "It is not about usefulness, Nari. It is about our species' strength. Each generation must be better than the last. You represent weakness." Nari felt her face grow hot. She had heard these words all her life. In school, the other children had pushed her aside. At work, she had to prove herself constantly. Now, at 26 cycles old, the council had finally decided she was not worth keeping. "What will happen to me?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Exile," said Elder Da. "You will be sent to the habitable planet designated Earth. May you find peace where your stature will not burden our progress." The guards stepped forward. They were huge even for Magnos people, nearly 17 feet tall. One touched her shoulder with a metal rod, and pain shot through her body. Neri fell to her knees, unable to move. "This is not fair," she whispered. "Fairness is a luxury," said Elder Mun, the oldest of them all. "Survival is our necessity." The guards lifted her paralyzed body. As they carried her away, Nari caught a final glimpse of the council. Not one of them looked sorry. To them, she was simply a problem being solved. 3 hours later, Neri sat strapped in the exile pod. The paralysis had worn off, but there was nowhere to go. The pod was barely big enough for her to sit up straight, designed for emergency escapes, not comfort. Through the small window, she could see Magnos shrinking, its purple-blue surface gleaming in the light of its 3 suns. A screen in front of her flickered to life. "Exile Pod A247 launching," said a computerized voice. "Destination: Earth. Journey time: approximately 3.7 standard cycles. Stasis will begin in 5 minutes. Please review Earth information before stasis." Nari wiped tears from her face. The screen showed images of Earth, a blue and green planet with white clouds swirling over its surface. According to the data, Earth's gravity was only 0.67 of Magnos gravity. Its inhabitants, humans, averaged less than 6 feet in height. She laughed bitterly. On Earth, she would be a giant. The computer continued. "Earth atmosphere is compatible with Magnos physiology. Warning: lower gravity will result in increased physical capabilities. Caution is advised." Nari touched the screen, scrolling through more information. Humans looked similar to Magnos people, but smaller and with more color variation. They had different nations, languages, and cultures. They had not yet achieved space travel beyond their own system. "Earth languages being uploaded to neural implant," the computer announced. Nari felt a tingling sensation at the base of her skull, where her education implant sat. Knowledge of Earth's major languages began flowing into her mind: English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi. The screen changed to show a map of Earth. Landing zone: North American continent, region designated Oregon. Remote forested area selected to minimize initial contact. Nari thought about her life on Magnos. Her parents had died when she was young. A mining accident. She had grown up in the community center, always the smallest, always fighting to be noticed. She had trained as an engineer, and despite her size, she had become skilled at designing water purification systems. None of that had mattered to the council. To be small is to be weak, they had always said, and weakness cannot be tolerated. The stasis warning beeped. 1 minute left. Neri looked at her home planet one last time. It was now just a bright spot among the stars. I hope your perfect society chokes on its own pride, she whispered. The screen flashed. Warning, pod damage detected. Repair systems activated. Course correction required. Neri sat up straighter. What damage? Show me. A diagram appeared, showing a tear in one of the fuel lines. The computer voice remained calm. Damage is within acceptable parameters. Repair drones deployed. Estimated success rate, 82%. Neri's engineering training kicked in. She studied the diagram and saw that the tear was near a critical junction. If it spread, the whole system could fail. Computer, give me manual control of the repair drones. Manual control not recommended for exiles. Override. Authorization code Neri 7729 Engineer First Class. There was a pause. Override accepted. The screen changed to show the view from a tiny repair drone. Neri could see the damaged fuel line. Using the touchscreen, she guided the drone closer and examined the tear. It was worse than the computer had indicated. Second drone, bring sealant compound B7, she instructed. Working quickly, she used the drones to repair the damaged line properly. As she finished, the stasis warning sounded again. Stasis beginning in 30 seconds. Neri leaned back in her seat, suddenly exhausted. Even in exile, she was saving Magnus technology. Maybe on Earth, her skills would be appreciated. As the stasis drugs flowed into her system, making her eyelids heavy, Neri had one last thought. On Earth, no one would call her tiny. On Earth, perhaps she could finally stand tall. The stasis field activated, and darkness claimed her. The exile pod adjusted its course and sped toward the distant blue planet, carrying its passenger across the stars. A woman rejected for being too small, heading to a world where she would tower above all others. The exile pod crashed through Earth's atmosphere, leaving a trail of fire across the morning sky. It plowed through the tall pine trees of the Oregon forest and dug a deep trench in the soil before coming to rest in a small clearing. Steam rose from the hot metal shell as the forest fell silent around it. Inside, Neri slowly woke from stasis. Her head pounded and her mouth felt dry. The computer's voice came through static. Landing complete. External atmosphere compatible. Caution advised. Neri pressed her hand against the pod's door. It slid open with a hiss. Fresh air rushed in, carrying the smell of earth and plants. She took a deep breath. It felt good, clean and cool in her lungs. She stepped out carefully, immediately noticing something strange. She felt lighter, as if she might float away. Each step seemed to carry her too far. The computer had warned her about Earth's lighter gravity, but experiencing it was different. Neri stretched her arms, testing her movements. She jumped slightly and rose almost 6 feet off the ground, landing with ease. A smile spread across her face, the first real smile in a long time. The forest around her was beautiful. Tall green trees reached toward the sky, though none came close to the height of the buildings on Magnus. Small animals scurried away as she walked around the clearing. Birds called from above, their songs unlike any she had heard before. "So this is my new home," she said aloud, testing her voice in the earth air. It sounded normal to her ears. Neri examined her pod. The damage was worse than she had thought. The outer shell was dented and scorched. It would never fly again. That didn't matter. There was nowhere to go. This was a one-way trip. She retrieved her few possessions, a data tablet, tools, and a small box containing a picture of her parents. Everything else she needed, she would have to find here. The sound of engines broke the forest quiet. Neri tensed, listening. Multiple vehicles were approaching. The humans had found her. She considered hiding but decided against it. First contact was inevitable. Better to face it on her terms. Within minutes, 4 black vehicles with the letters NSRC painted on their sides entered the clearing. They stopped a safe distance from the pod. Men and women in white coats stepped out, staring in wonder at the crashed ship. A small woman with short black hair and glasses approached first. She wore a badge that read Dr. Hannah Park, National Science Research Center. "Hello," Hannah said, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "Can you understand me?" Nari nodded, feeling strange in Earth's lighter gravity. "I learned your languages during my journey." Hannah's eyes widened in surprise. Behind her, the other researchers whispered excitedly. "May I ask who you are and where you're from?" Hannah continued. "My name is Nari. I come from a planet called Magnos." Nari replied. She decided to stand up straight, revealing her full height. A gasp rippled through the gathered researchers as Nari rose to her full 9 feet. Even hunched slightly, she towered over them. "She's enormous," whispered a young man who stood beside Hannah, clutching a tablet. "This is Ta, my assistant," Hannah explained, noticing Nari's gaze. "We're scientists. We mean you no harm." Nari nodded. "I believe you." The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of more vehicles, these much louder. 3 green military trucks burst into the clearing, brakes squealing as they stopped. Soldiers jumped out, raising weapons toward Nari. "Step away from the alien," shouted their commander, a stern-faced man with a crew cut. "This is a matter of national security." Hannah turned, placing herself between the soldiers and Nari. "Please, Commander Jun. She's not hostile. We were just establishing communication." "That's not your call, Doctor," Jun replied, motioning his men forward. "We have protocols for first contact scenarios." Nari watched the soldiers approach with their strange weapons. On Magnos, she would have been powerless against such a force. But here, in Earth's lighter gravity, she felt the strength in her muscles. She could probably throw one of their vehicles if she wanted to. Instead, she slowly knelt down, making herself less threatening. "I come in peace," she said, using an English phrase she had learned from the pod's database. "I mean no harm to Earth or its people." Commander Jun hesitated, clearly surprised that she could speak English. "What are you doing on our planet?" "I was exiled from my world," Nari said simply. "I have nowhere else to go." This caused another round of whispers among both the scientists and soldiers. Hannah stepped closer to Nari, ignoring Commander Jun's warning. "Exiled? Why would they exile you?" Nari looked down at the much smaller woman. "Because I was too small." Ta laughed nervously. "Too small? You're gigantic." "On my world, I am a runt," Nari explained. "The average height of my people is 15 feet. I was considered genetically inferior." Commander Jun lowered his weapon slightly. "So you're a refugee?" "Yes," Nari said. "I seek asylum on your world." The commander and Dr. Park exchanged looks. This was clearly not the scenario either had prepared for. "We need to take you to our facility," Hannah said gently, "to make sure you're not carrying any diseases and to learn more about you. Would that be acceptable?" Nari looked at the crashed pod, her last connection to Magnos. There was nothing there for her now. "Yes," she said. "I will go with you." Commander Jun spoke into his radio, requesting a larger transport vehicle. The soldiers maintained their positions but seemed less tense. As they waited, Nari felt the Earth sun on her face. It was warmer than the light of the 3 suns of Magnos, yet somehow gentler. A small insect landed on her hand, a butterfly with blue wings. She watched it with wonder. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Hannah said, noticing Nari's fascination. "On my world, we have nothing so delicate," Nari replied. For the first time since the Council's judgment, Nari felt something like hope. She had been cast out for being small, but here on Earth, she was anything but small. Here, perhaps, she could find a place where she truly belonged. Nari sat on a reinforced steel table in the medical lab as Dr. Jin examined the results on his screen. 3 months had passed since her arrival on Earth, and the testing seemed endless. Today they were reviewing her physical capabilities. The gravity difference gives you approximately 5 times the strength of our strongest athletes, explained Dr. Jin as he reviewed Nari's physical assessment. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the data. Your bone density is remarkable. Nari nodded, still adjusting to a world where people looked up to her. Literally, 3 months on Earth had transformed her from an outcast to a marvel. I broke another bed frame last night, she admitted. I forget how careful I need to be. Dr. Jin smiled. We're designing furniture that can support you properly. The engineers are excited about the challenge. Nari had been given a large room in the east wing of the research center. They had removed walls to create a space big enough for her, but everything was still too small. She slept on the floor most nights, finding it more comfortable than trying to fit on human furniture. Can I see the strength test results? She asked. Dr. Jin turned the screen toward her. The graph showed her lifting capacity compared to Earth's strongest weightlifters. Her bar on the chart was 5 times higher. Yesterday, I helped the maintenance team move that broken generator, Nari said. They wanted to call a crane, but I carried it myself. It felt light to me. That generator weighs over 2 tons, Dr. Jin said, shaking his head in wonder. On your world, you were considered small and weak. Here, you're practically superhuman. Nari thought about this. On Magnos, her strength had been average at best. Here, she could lift cars and bend metal bars with her bare hands. The irony wasn't lost on her. The door slid open, and Dr. Hannah Park entered the lab. She carried a tablet and looked tired. As the lead scientist assigned to Nari's case, Hannah worked long hours coordinating the various research teams. Good morning, Hannah said with a smile. How are the tests going? Nari continues to surprise us, Dr. Jin replied. Her cellular regeneration rate is twice that of humans. She heals incredibly fast. Hannah nodded, making notes on her tablet. The biology team will want to follow up on that. But first, we need to discuss something else. She looked up at Nari. The interview requests are piling up. Everyone wants to meet you. Nari frowned. Since the news of her arrival had gone public 2 weeks ago, the world had become obsessed with the giant alien woman. Videos of her helping around the research center had gone viral. People gathered outside the facility gates daily, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. On my world, no one wanted to acknowledge my existence, Nari said quietly. Here, I cannot escape attention. Hannah placed a gentle hand on Nari's arm. I know it's overwhelming, but the government thinks controlled media access might help ease people's fears. Is a television interview really necessary? Nari asked. The alternative is endless speculation and rumors, Hannah explained. People are curious. Some are frightened. Letting them see you speak might help. Nari nodded reluctantly. I understand. When would this happen? Next week. Just one reporter here in the center. You'll have approval over all questions beforehand. After finishing with Dr. Jin, Nari returned to her room. The walls were decorated with drawings sent by children from local schools. Most depicted her as a friendly giant, often saving cats from trees or helping people cross rivers. The children seemed to accept her more easily than the adults. She sat cross-legged on her floor mat and opened her data tablet. She had been learning Earth history and culture, trying to understand this strange new world. The concept of nations was particularly confusing. On Magnos, there had been one global government for thousands of years. A soft knock interrupted her reading. It was Ta, Hannah's assistant, bringing dinner. Special delivery, he said cheerfully, wheeling in a cart loaded with food. Chef went all out tonight. He's testing different cuisines to see what you like best. Nari smiled. The food on Earth was one of her favorite discoveries. Magnos cuisine had been bland and functional, designed for nutrition rather than pleasure. Earth food exploded with flavors and textures she had never imagined. Thank you, Ta. Will you join me? Todd pulled up a chair as Neri sampled the various dishes. There was spicy chicken, pasta with cheese, steamed vegetables, and a sweet dessert made with chocolate. "The chocolate is amazing," she said after tasting it. "We had nothing like this on Magnos." "No chocolate?" Todd looked shocked. What kind of advanced civilization doesn't discover chocolate? They both laughed. These small moments of friendship meant everything to Neri. Todd treated her normally, not as a scientific curiosity or a potential threat. "There's a movie night in the staff lounge later," Todd mentioned. "They're showing something called E.T. Hannah thought you might find it interesting." "A movie about aliens?" Neri asked. "It's a classic," Todd said with a grin. "From the 1980s, a bit before my time, but still good." Later that evening, Neri ducked through the doorway of the staff lounge. The room fell silent as she entered. Though she worked with these people daily, her presence still caused a stir. She carefully sat on the floor near the back, trying not to block anyone's view. The movie told the story of a small alien stranded on Earth who befriends a human child. Neri watched, fascinated by the parallels to her own situation. When the alien in the film became sick, separated from its home, she felt tears forming in her eyes. After the movie, Neri returned to her room and turned on the small television. She flipped through channels until she found the news. They were showing footage of the research center, her new home. Outside the gates, a crowd had gathered. Most held signs welcoming her to Earth, but some had different messages. Signs reading, "Aliens go home," and "Earth for humans" filled the screen. Even in a world where she was physically superior, some still feared difference. The camera zoomed in on a man shouting into a megaphone. "We don't know what it wants. The government is hiding the truth about the alien invasion." Neri turned off the television. She walked to her window and looked out at the night sky. Somewhere up there was Magnos, the world that had rejected her. She wondered if the council ever thought about her, the exile they had sent away. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Hannah stood at the door, holding 2 cups of tea. "I saw the news," Hannah said, offering Neri a cup. "I'm sorry about those protesters." "You don't need to apologize," Neri replied. "Fear of the unknown exists everywhere, even on Magnos." They sat together by the window, looking at the stars. Neri had been studying Earth's constellations, learning the stories humans had created from patterns of light. "Tomorrow will be better," Hannah promised. "The education minister wants to arrange video calls between you and classrooms around the country. Children have so many questions for you." Neri smiled at this. Children were the same everywhere, curious and open-minded. "I would like that," she said. As Hannah left for the night, Neri felt a strange sense of peace. 3 months ago, she had been exiled in shame. Now she was preparing to speak to the world. On Magnos, her small size had made her invisible. On Earth, her difference made her impossible to ignore. She looked at her hands, the hands that could now lift cars and bend steel, the same hands that had been deemed too weak on her homeworld. Perhaps this exile had not been a punishment after all, but a second chance. 6 months after Neri's arrival on Earth, she sat in a hotel room in Busan, South Korea. She was there as part of a global goodwill tour organized by the United Nations. Dr. Hannah Park sat beside her, reviewing the schedule for the day. "First, we visit the Science Center to meet with students," Hannah explained. "Then lunch with the mayor, followed by..." The floor suddenly shifted beneath them. The water in Neri's glass rippled. A low rumble grew louder, like a giant beast waking underground. "Earthquake," Hannah gasped, grabbing the doorframe as the shaking intensified. The building swayed violently. Pictures fell from walls. The television crashed to the floor. Outside, car alarms blared and people screamed. Neri steadied herself, less affected by the motion thanks to her superior balance. She pulled Hannah under the doorway and shielded her with her body as pieces of ceiling fell around them. After 60 terrifying seconds, the shaking stopped. The sudden silence felt wrong. quickly filled by distant screams and sirens. "We need to get outside," Hannah said, her voice shaking. Aftershocks could bring down the building. They made their way down 6 flights of emergency stairs. Other hotel guests stumbled alongside them, some crying, others in shocked silence. When they reached the street, chaos greeted them. Buildings had collapsed. Cars lay crushed under fallen concrete. People wandered in a daze, many bleeding from cuts. Emergency vehicles struggled to move through debris-filled streets. Neri looked around, horrified. "How bad is it?" A police officer nearby was shouting into his radio in Korean. Hannah listened, then translated. 7.9 magnitude. The downtown area is heavily damaged. Many buildings down. Without hesitation, Neri turned to Hannah. "I need to help." Hannah nodded. "I'll contact the emergency services. They'll tell us where you're needed most." Within minutes, Hannah had spoken to emergency coordinators. The Dongdaegu station area is worst hit. A school bus was returning from a field trip when the overpass collapsed on it. Neri didn't wait. She began running toward the location, covering ground with her long strides. The Earth's lighter gravity allowed her to move faster than any human could. She reached the scene in minutes. The concrete overpass had completely collapsed, crushing everything beneath it. Emergency workers were trying to reach a yellow school bus visible under the rubble, but they lacked the equipment to lift the massive concrete slabs. "Stand back," Neri shouted in Korean, a language she had learned during her months on Earth. The rescue workers turned, surprised to see the 9-foot alien woman. Some recognized her from news reports. "The children are still alive," a firefighter told her. "We can hear them crying, but we can't reach them." Neri examined the collapsed structure. The main section of concrete weighed at least 30 tons. No human could lift it, but she wasn't human. She positioned herself at the edge of the largest slab. "When I lift, you pull the children out. I don't know how long I can hold it." The rescue workers nodded, preparing stretchers and medical supplies. Neri took a deep breath and braced her shoulder under the concrete edge. With a grunt, she pushed upward with all her strength. On Magnos, such weight would have been impossible for her to budge. But here on Earth, with her Magnos muscles working against lighter gravity, she could perform feats no human could match. The concrete shifted, then rose. Sweat poured down Neri's face as she lifted the massive weight. Pain shot through her shoulders and back, but she kept pushing. Inch by inch, the slab rose until a 3-foot gap appeared, just enough for rescuers to slip through. "Hurry," she gasped through clenched teeth. The rescue workers rushed forward, crawling into the space she had created. Neri could hear children crying inside the bus. Her muscles burned like fire, but she held steady. Behind her, a news crew had arrived. Their cameras captured everything as the first child was passed out through the gap. Then another and another. 12 children in all, some injured but all alive. "That's all of them," shouted a rescuer. "Everyone's out." With a groan, Neri carefully lowered the concrete slab back down. Her legs shook with exhaustion. A cheer went up from the growing crowd of onlookers. But there was no time to rest. Reports were coming in of people trapped throughout the city. For the next 8 hours, Neri moved from site to site, lifting debris that would have required heavy machinery and teams of workers. She pulled survivors from collapsed buildings, cleared roads for emergency vehicles, and helped stabilize damaged structures. As evening fell, Neri stood in what had been a shopping district. Her clothes were torn and dirty. Her hands were raw and bleeding. Even her tough Magnos skin had limits. But she kept working. News helicopters circled overhead. Across Korea and around the world, people watched in awe as the alien they had once feared saved human after human. "Neri," Hannah's voice called through the dust. She ran up, looking exhausted but determined. "There's something else. The research center back home was attacked." Neri stopped, a broken wall section still in her hands. "Attacked? By who?" "The Earth First group," Hannah explained, referring to the anti-alien extremists who had been protesting since Neri's arrival. They thought the earthquake would distract everyone. They tried to break into the lab where your genetic samples are stored. Was anyone hurt? Neri asked, setting down the wall. Security stopped them. 2 guards were injured, but they'll recover. Hannah showed Neri her phone, where security footage played. Men in masks had stormed the facility gates with guns, only to be repelled by security forces. Neri sighed. Even as she saved human lives, others were plotting against her. The irony wasn't lost on her. A small boy approached them, no more than 6 years old. He carried a bottle of water, which he held up to Neri. She knelt down, accepting it with a gentle smile. "Thank you," she said in Korean. The boy touched her hand, unafraid of her alien appearance. "Are you an angel?" he asked. Neri shook her head. "No, just someone who wants to help." More people gathered around them, offering food, water, and thanks. An elderly woman pressed a handkerchief into Neri's hand to wipe her face. A man bowed deeply before her. As night fell over the damaged city, emergency lights cast a blue glow over the scene. Rescue efforts continued, but now Neri wasn't working alone. Hundreds of volunteers had joined in, inspired by the alien woman's tireless efforts. On a large screen in the city square, news footage showed Neri lifting the concrete off the school bus. Below the video, the caption read, "Earth's Guardian Angel." Hannah touched Neri's arm. "You should rest. You've been working for hours." Neri looked out at the city, where thousands still needed help. On Magnos, I was too small to matter. Here, I'm big enough to make a difference. She straightened her tired shoulders. "I'll rest later. There's more work to do." As she walked toward the next collapsed building, people stepped aside, watching with newfound respect. The alien they had feared had become the hero they needed. The Grand Hall of the United Nations building in New York had been specially modified for today's ceremony. The ceiling had been raised in one section, and a custom podium installed that stood higher than normal. Flags from all 193 member nations lined the walls, a colorful backdrop to the historic event about to unfold. 1 year had passed since Neri's arrival on Earth. 1 year since a small exile pod had crashed in an Oregon forest, carrying a passenger deemed too small and weak for her own world. Neri stood backstage, adjusting her new uniform. It was deep blue with silver trim, specially designed to fit her 9-foot frame. Dr. Hannah Park stood beside her, checking details on her tablet. "Nervous?" Hannah asked, looking up at her friend. Neri nodded. "A little. I never imagined I would represent Earth this way." "After Busan, the whole world saw what you could do," Hannah replied. "This position was created for you." The Busan earthquake had changed everything. Images of Neri lifting concrete slabs and rescuing children had been broadcast worldwide. After that day, the protests stopped. The fear turned to admiration. Countries began requesting her help with their own disasters. "It's time," said an aide, poking his head through the door. Neri took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The room fell silent as she approached the podium. Her height, once her greatest shame on Magnos, now made her an impressive figure. Cameras flashed. Delegates from around the world watched with respect. The Secretary General, a small man who barely reached Neri's waist, smiled up at her. "Today marks a new chapter in Earth's history," he began. "For the first time, we welcome a non-human to a position of global leadership." He turned toward Neri. "The United Nations Emergency Response Team welcomes its newest director," he announced, gesturing toward Neri, who stood tall in her custom-designed uniform. "Director Neri will coordinate our response to natural disasters worldwide, using her extraordinary abilities to save lives where conventional methods fall short." Applause filled the hall. Neri stepped forward to the microphone. "Thank you for this honor," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "1 year ago, I arrived on your planet as an exile, rejected by my own world for being too small." She paused, Looking out at the sea of faces. On Earth, I found a place where difference is not always feared, but sometimes celebrated. I pledge to use my strength to protect the people of this world. My new home. More applause followed. After the ceremony, Nari spent hours shaking hands with world leaders and diplomats. Many thanked her personally for her work during recent disasters. Fires in Australia, floods in Bangladesh, a building collapse in Brazil. In each case, Nari had done what no human or machine could do. That evening, Nari returned to her new apartment in New York. The city had renovated an entire floor of a building to accommodate her size. Large windows offered a view of the skyline, lights twinkling against the darkening sky. She changed out of her uniform and turned on the television. News of her appointment dominated every channel. One program showed children in a classroom drawing pictures of her. Another showed a store selling t-shirts with her silhouette lifting a concrete slab, with the words "Be like Nari" printed below. Be like Nari had become a worldwide slogan meaning to use your uniqueness as strength. The phrase appeared on billboards, in commercials, and in school programs aimed at helping children embrace their differences. Her data tablet chimed with a message from Hannah. Check your email. You've received 10,000 letters from children today alone. Nari smiled. The children of Earth had accepted her most quickly and completely. She often visited schools, ducking through doorways to sit cross-legged on the floor, while tiny humans climbed on her shoulders and asked endless questions about space. She walked to her kitchen and opened the refrigerator, which had been built to her scale. Inside were foods from around the world, gifts from grateful nations. Nari selected fruit from Brazil and bread from France, a simple dinner after a long day. As she ate, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. On Magnos, she had been considered worthless, a genetic mistake to be removed from society. Here on Earth, her size and strength made her special, valued, even revered. There was one thing left to do today, something she had planned for months. In the privacy of her apartment, Nari activated the communication device Hannah had helped her build. The technology combined parts from her Exiled pod with Earth components. For weeks, they had calculated the exact frequency needed to reach Magnos, timing the transmission to coincide with her home planet's position. The device hummed to life. A blue light indicated the connection was searching. Minutes passed. Nari waited, wondering if anyone would answer. Finally, the screen flickered. A face appeared, stern, gray-skinned, with the high forehead characteristic of Magnos people. Elder Da, leader of the High Council that had exiled her. Transmission received, came Elder Da's surprised voice from millions of miles away. His eyes widened as he recognized her. Exiled Nari, you survived. Without speaking, Nari simply transmitted the day's news broadcasts, showing her rescue efforts, her UN appointment, the crowds cheering her name. She sent images of herself lifting structures no Earth machine could move, of children looking up to her with admiration, of world leaders standing beside her tiny in comparison. Elder Da watched in silence, his expression unreadable. Other council members appeared behind him, whispering in shock at the sight of the exile they had discarded. Nari, Elder Da finally said, the council requests your return to Magnos. Your unique adaptations to Earth gravity could benefit our genetic research. We would welcome you back with. Nari pressed a button, cutting off his words mid-sentence. She ended the transmission without waiting for a response. There was nothing more to say. On Magnos, she had been nothing. On Earth, she had become everything they needed. Her small size, her greatest shame on her home world, had become her greatest asset on Earth. She walked to the window and looked out at the city. Her city now. Somewhere below, humans went about their lives, never knowing that among them walked a woman from the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A hurricane was forming in the Atlantic. A team of engineers wanted her help testing a new bridge design. A children's hospital had invited her to visit patients. Sometimes, Nari thought with a smile, Being in the wrong place was merely a prelude to finding where you truly belong. She placed her hand against the window glass, feeling the vibration of the city below. Not an exile anymore, but a guardian. Not a runt, but a giant. Not a mistake, but a miracle. Home at last.